So, we're told we're back on. Sorry that there are technical issues. I guess this being our first live stream, it was always going to be the case. But we're pleased. If you are hanging on, great. Settle in. We might be here till early evening. I hope not. But otherwise, this will be available on YouTube afterwards. So what you miss, you'll be able to catch up then. But for now, if you have been following what we've been putting out all week, you'll see that we've been following the Stations of the Cross. Well, there are various different versions of the stations. And John Henson's going to lead us in a reflection of one of the alternative stations now, as he shares with us a reflection on Veronica.
By definition, was an angel. But here we have a poem, The Face Wiper, which endeavours to see Veronica as somebody whose true home is eternity, rather than the warp of time. But she likes to go for little trips. The Face Wiper. Picture dear Veronica taking a photo with her cam. Angel wings are hidden beneath her white cloak, marking guilt and shame. She had been among the choir in the fields in Bethlehem. She had taken pictures then with her 20th century cam. Now her tech is up to date, hidden in a linen cloth. Loving nod to Jesus given, spreads her wings and then flies off. Nearly always incognito, fascinated by the trade. She was spotted in flagrante, an example must be made. Hounded by the lying righteous, ne'er had such a great surprise. The boss was asked to give the verdict. Just could not believe her eyes. No, they didn't try to stone her after what God's likeness said. So with shaven head they led her through the peering crowd instead. Could have pressed her danger button, but didn't want to make a show. Since the boss shunned recognition, she trod the path he was to go. Did not take her cam home with her, thought someday may be of use. But alas, it found the hands of divines, abstruse and obtuse. So here I am, stuck in a gilt frame, wiping the Saviour's sweaty brow, when in fact I was taking a snap. I hope you twig it better now.
I'm going to read some prayers from this book, Michelle Fast's book, Prayers of Life. And the section is Prayers on the Way of the Cross. There will be 4 short prayers. Jesus bears his cross. If any man has a mind to come my way, let him renounce self and take up the cross daily and follow me. He who tries to save his life will lose it. It is in the man who loves his life, loses his life for my sake, that will save it. Lord, here is your cross, as if it were your cross. You had no cross, and you came to get ours. And all through your life, and all along the way to Calvary, you took upon you, one by one, the sins of the world. You have to go forward and bend and suffer. The cross must be carried. Lord, you walk on silently. Is it true then that there is a time for speaking and a time for silence? Is it true that there is a time for struggling and another for the silent bearing of our sins and the sins of the world? Lord, I would rather fight the cross. To bear it is hard. The more I progress and the more I see the evil in the world, the heavier is the cross on my shoulders. Lord, help me to understand that the most generous deed is nothing unless it is also silently redemptive. And since you want this long way of the cross for me, at the dawning of each day, help me to set forth. Jesus meets his mother. As for thine own soul, I shall have a sword to pierce it. Lord, I pray for your mother, your poor mother. She follows you. She follows mankind on its way of the cross. She walks in the crowd unknown, but she doesn't take her eyes from you. Every gesture of yours, every sigh, every blow, every wound enters her heart. She knows your sufferings. She suffers your sufferings. And without coming near you, without touching you, without speaking to you, Lord, you share. With you she saves the world. Others mingled with the crowd. I accompany men on their way of the cross, and I am crushed by evil. I feel incapable of saving the world. It is too heavy and rotten, and every day at the turn of the road I meet with new injustices and new impurities. Lord, show me your mother, Mary, the useless one, the ineffectual one in the sight of men, but the co-redemptress in the sight of God. Help me to walk among men, eager to know their miseries and their sins. May I never avert my eyes. May I never close my heart, that in welcoming the sufferings of the world with Mary, your mother, I may suffer and redeem. A woman wipes the face of Jesus. We carry about continually in our bodies the dying state of Jesus, so that the living power of Jesus may be manifested in our bodies too. At present, we are looking at a confused reflection in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. For a long time, Lord, her eyes were on you. She suffered from your suffering. Unable to bear it any longer, she pushed the soldiers aside and wiped your face with a cloth of fine linen. Were your bleeding features imprinted on her cloth? Maybe. In her heart, surely. Lord, I need to contemplate you at great length, disinterestedly, as a little brother admires and loves his big brother. For I want to resemble you, and for that I must first look at you. If you want, I shall become a little like you, since friends who love each other become one. But Lord, too often I pass in front of you carelessly, or am bored when I stop and look at you. And to others I must be a sad caricature of you. Forgive my body, eager for pleasures. It does not bring your presence to others. Forgive my clouded eyes. In them others cannot see your light. Forgive my encumbered heart. In it, others do not see your love. Nevertheless, Lord, come to me. My door is open. Jesus dies on the cross. He dispossessed himself and took the nature of a slave, fashioned in the likeness of men, and presenting himself to us in the human form. And then he lowered his own dignity, accepted an obedience which brought him to death on the cross. We too must be ready to lay down our lives for the sake of our brethren. A few hours more, a few minutes more, a few instants more. For 33 years it has been going on. For 33 years you have lived fully minute after minute. You can no longer escape now. You are there, at the end of your life, at the end of your road. You are at the last extremity, at the edge of a precipice. You must take the last step of love, the last step of life that ends in death. You hesitate. 3 hours are long. 3 hours of agony. Longer than 3 years of life. Longer than 30 years of life. You must decide, Lord. All is ready around you. You are there, motionless on your cross. You have renounced all activity other than embracing these cross planks for which you were made. And yet there is still life in your nailed body. Let mortal flesh die and make way for eternity. Now life slips from each limb, one by one, finding refuge in his still beating heart. Immeasurable heart, overflowing heart, heavy as the world of sin and miseries that it bears. Lord, one more effort. Mankind is there, waiting unknowingly for the cry of its Saviour. Your brothers are there. They need you. Your Father bends over you, already holding out his arms. Lord, save us. Save us. See, he has taken his heavy heart and slowly, laboriously, alone between heaven and earth, in the awesome night, with passionate love, he has gathered his life. He has gathered the sin of the world, and in a cry, he has given all. Father, into thy hands I commit my spirit. Christ has just died for us. Lord, help me to die for you. Help me to die for them.
was a man who told them some stories and did the most amazing things to share the good news of God's love with all the people. But the religious leaders turned against him and eventually turned the people against him, so that Good Friday came, and Good Friday was a bad day. Good Friday was a sad day. I wonder if this black cloth is the rich soil of a garden where people go to pray. I wonder, is this black cloth a dark night sky where terrible things happen? I wonder, is this black cloth the sky that turned black at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on that first Good Friday? It was a bad day. It was a sad day. Late on the Thursday evening, early Friday morning, Jesus and his friends went to the Garden of Gethsemane to pray. Jesus asked his friends to stay awake, but they were tired and they couldn't. And so they fell asleep as he prayed for God to take the cup of suffering away. But he said, "Your will be done, not mine." It was a bad day. It was a sad day. Judas betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. It was a bad day. It was a sad day. The soldiers came to take him away, and his disciples fled. And before the cock crowed 3 times, Peter denied Jesus, as Jesus said he would. It was a bad day. It was a sad day. The soldiers took Jesus away, and he was condemned to death. They took his clothes from him and cast lots for them. And they placed a crown of thorns on his head, and they mocked him and beat him. It was a bad day. It was a sad day. Jesus was made to carry his cross and was crucified with 2 thieves. The crowds mocked, but as he breathed his dying breaths, Jesus asked for forgiveness for those who treated him so badly. It was a bad day. It was a sad day. At 3 o'clock, Jesus breathed his last breath, and the temple curtain was torn in 2. It was a bad day. It was a sad day. A gift from an occupied territory today tells the story of a crucifixion that took place in an occupied territory 2,000 years ago. Olive wood, carved and crafted in the 21st century, made to tell the story of man's inhumanity to man and of great love over 2,000 years ago. I wonder what the craftspeople think as they make the wooden crosses and fashion an empty tomb with their hands. I look at the familiar Easter scene and I wonder, who is this lonely figure? On Good Friday, I wonder, is it Peter standing alone, ashamed of what he has done, ashamed of the denial that Jesus foretold? Perhaps he is building up the courage to stand with the others at the foot of the cross, to say, I am with you now, and I am sorry for the past. Perhaps the figure is Mary, Jesus' mother, watching in anguish as her son dies a cruel and unjustified death. Perhaps she is remembering back to the birth of her special son and the words by Simeon in the temple that sorrow would pierce her heart like a sharp sword. Surely this wasn't how things were supposed to be for God's chosen one, her special son. Or perhaps it's Nicodemus, regretting the decision of the Sanhedrin, watching and waiting to offer sanctuary for the broken body of Jesus after his death, so that he could be placed in an empty tomb. Or perhaps it's the Roman soldier who recognised Jesus' true nature, saying, truly this man was the Son of God. I wonder who you think the figure might be. The stone is rolled away. And again, I wonder, who is that lonely figure in the garden? Perhaps it is the risen Jesus, wondering how the women will react to what they find when they come to perform the ritual anointing. Perhaps he is wondering what will be the best way to make himself known to them, so as not to frighten them. Perhaps it is Mary, surprised and upset by what she finds, only to meet the risen Jesus later and to be commissioned by him to go and tell the other disciples the good news. He is risen. I wonder, who do you think the figure might be? I wonder, what would we have thought and felt if we had been that figure?
Here is love, fast as the flood, when the Prince of life our ransom shed for us his precious blood, who his love will not remember, who can cease to sing his praise. He can never be forgotten through our heads eternal day. On the mount of crucifixion, fountains open deep and wide, through the floodgates of God's mercy flowed the vast and gracious tide. Grace and love like mighty rivers poured incessant from above. Heaven's peace and perfect justice kiss the guilty word of love. Let us all his love that sends love for all our days. Let us see his kingdom only, and our lives to his praise. He alone shall be our glory, nothing in the world to see. He has cleansed and sanctified us. He himself has set us free. Yes, yes, he set us free. He does direct me by his Spirit through his word and his grace. My need is meeting as I trust in him alone. For his fullness he is pouring in his love and power in me. Without measure, full and boundless, as I yield myself to his love. His love will not remember, who can cease to sing his praise. He can never be forgotten through our heads eternal day.
There are times in all our lives when we feel helpless in the face of suffering and death, be it members of our own family or people we may not know so well. During the last year, this burden, as well as the great burden of grief and loss to families of loved ones, has fallen on doctors, nurses, and carers who have had to stand alongside those who have suffered and died from coronavirus and other diseases, and have taken the place of families as loved ones have drawn their final breath. The burden to many has been unbearable, and we hear of many tears being shed in the mental effects of observing and indeed taking on the suffering of their patients, as well as the grief of families who have been denied being with their loved ones during their final moments. The meditation I'm going to read is from the Lent readings from Iona and was written by Tom Gordon, a chaplain at the Edinburgh Marie Curie Centre, a former Church of Scotland minister and a member of the Iona community. These men and women also take on other people's suffering, and here we see it through the eyes of Tom Gordon as he tells of his experience of the death of one of his patients. Simon of Cyrene also was asked to take up Jesus' cross, and in so doing became a sharer in Jesus' suffering. But first, a couple of verses from Mark chapter 15. On the way, they met a man named Simon, who was coming into the city from the country, and the soldiers forced him to carry Jesus' cross. Simon was from Cyrene and was the father of Alexander and Rufus. They took Jesus to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. The door of Sam's room had been left open by the nurses. His family's distress was obvious, his wife holding his hand, his daughter with her arm around her mum, his son staring out of the open window as they waited for Sam to die. I wanted to go in and meet this family in their sorrow, but I had nothing to offer. No clever words to say. I only glanced into the room as I passed, a spectator of their pain and grief. It could not and would not last. Eventually I felt compelled to go in. I was scared, ill-equipped, tongue-tied and out of my depth. But for a moment or two, and on 2 or 3 other occasions throughout the day, I offered what I could. A stumbling word, a shared silence, a comforting touch. Each time overwhelmed by the pain of it all and my uselessness to make it any different. Sam died that night. Next morning, the door of his room was still open, but there was no patient or distressed family, only the empty bed and the stillness of the aftermath of death. I was relieved it was over for them, but also for me, for I needed no longer be burdened by the weight of my inadequacy. Later that morning, the family came to collect Sam's belongings and the death certificate, and asked to see me to say thank you for my help during yesterday. My help? I murmured some words of protest, but Sam's wife persisted. No, she said, you did good yesterday. All the family have said so, because you came into the room, and I know how hard that was for you. You came into the room, and I know how hard that was. The ultimate had not been possible. I could not stop the journey to death. My own inadequacies had been transparent. I would rather have been anywhere than be a part of the pain and sorrow, but with the compulsion to go in and the fearfulness of being there, in the transition from spectator to participant, something good of God had taken place. Simon too looked through a wide open door and witnessed a journey to death. And he too, coming up from Cyrene, minding his own business, maybe wishing he was back with Alexander and Rufus, he was forced into the drama. What good could he possibly do as he carried Christ's burden? Could he make the ultimate difference? Could he stop the crucifixion? From the distant spectator to the reluctant participant carrying a cross, what good was there in this? The good is God saying, thank you, Simon, for being there when you were needed and when others had turned away. When the ultimate is beyond you, but you still step over the threshold into the distress and the pain, you are Simon for Christ. And God says, thank you for your healing presence. When you stop walking by with the old excuses of better things to do,
but are forced into the drama. You are Simon on the road to Golgotha, and God says, thank you for being involved. When you cease being a spectator but become a participant, bearing that painful burden for a few stumbling steps, you are Simon, carrying the cross of Christ, and God says, thank you for your willing shoulder. When you withdraw, consumed by your inadequacy, you are Simon being Simon, until there is another drama to enter, another threshold to cross, and another cross to carry, with God saying, thank you for learning that your love makes a difference. And a prayer. God, who knows my frailties, forgive our self-doubt and uncertainty when we are content from a distance to watch others' pain. God, who calls our name even when we are reluctant, force our resistance and our fear of being overwhelmed by the task you compel us to take on. God, who offers us the cross, a burden too great for us to carry, help us to be willing participants on a journey we can neither understand nor change. God, who believes in us, help us to go on believing that you take the little we have offered and use it to make a difference. God, who knows us and calls us, who burdens us and believes in us, help us to hear your voice of thanks and be ready to serve again. Amen.
A childhood memory can be an evocative and powerful. Back in 2018, I heard on the radio tuned to a hymn that we had not sung in many years, and which took me right back to listening to an Easter vinyl EP that my dad had with the hymn, there is a green hill far away. I decided to look up the hymn, but on reading felt that the expression did not somehow chime with the way we now think of the events of Good Friday. So this is my attempt to maintain the spirit of the hymn with new words. With grateful thanks to Iestyn for his accompaniment, there is a black hill far away. Fast forward to 2021, and in our thinking about Lent and Easter, we were encouraged by our Minister Phil to think about what we might offer to aid our presentation of good news in the midst of the pandemic. Again, a tune came into my head of a much well-loved hymn, beloved by male voice choirs, When I Survey the Wondrous Cross. It is a hymn that is regularly sung with great passion in our church. But as with my first hymn, the language again does not quite speak to me of how we now view that what we might call redemption theology. So with that in mind, I offer a revised version, When We Look at the Cruel Cross.
2018, the year of my pilgrimage to the Holy Land. Some of my friends, when they heard I was going, said they wouldn't want to go as the places wouldn't be the same as they were when Jesus was there. I was prepared for that. Jerusalem, I knew from pictures, had churches built on all the special places. But when I got to Tiberias and stood on the shore of the Sea of Galilee and looked at the hills around, that would be as it was when Jesus walked there. On our first day, we were to walk the Via Dolorosa. My first sight of Jerusalem was, as I was expecting it, lots of domes and spires. Our guide told us the names of some of them. I can only remember the Dome of the Rock. At the first station of the cross, 2 churches, we were shown a section of pavement where it is thought Jesus was condemned by Pilate. I was standing there looking at this when one of our group read the passage from Mark, chapter 15, verse 15. Jesus is sentenced to death, followed by a prayer from Phil. Then Simon led us in singing, "Were you there when they crucified my Lord?" Tears started flowing, and my answer was, yes, I was. I am. The same question was sung at the other stations, and the tears were there, and my answer was the same. We ended the day at the garden tomb. More tears when we sang, "Were you there when they laid him in the tomb?" which became tears of joy as we came out of the empty tomb singing, "Were you there when he rose up from the grave?" Throughout the whole pilgrimage, so many experiences, so many emotions, which, as yet, I'm still not able to put into words.
You
when we were invited to contribute to today's reflections, Viviane and I, quite independently, decided to talk about the same subject, which Viviane will introduce to you now, and we'll compare notes.
When asked to reflect on Christ's crucifixion, my first thought went to Salvador Dali's St. John of the Cross, Christ. Dali was inspired in a dream by a drawing of the 16th century Friar John of the Cross, hence the name of the painting. A dear and lovely Spanish friend of mine gave me a copy of this painting about 30 years ago, and I have had an uneasy and ambiguous relationship with it ever since. I suppose that my own response mirrors the controversy and the ambiguity with which the painting was first received in 1951. This painting is intriguing because it is both realistic, traditional, conventional, but also not realistic and not conventional. And it's not conventional in a lot of ways. The cross is not anchored in the ground, but floating above the earth. Christ is not nailed to the cross. There are no nails in his hands and feet. Christ doesn't have a crown of thorns. His body looks strong, even though Christ is dying. And the method of execution looks painful and agonizing, and yet the body betrays the hours of persecution and agony. The size of the actual painting as well adds for me to the uneasiness. It's over 2 meters high and over 1 meter wide. Much of it, as you can see, is dark. It's even black. And this vast expanse of darkness, to me, is mysterious, and what lies behind it. And it fills one with awe. The St. John of the Cross Christ is painted with realism. We recognize it, but it's also removed from its usual context, and it is reassembled in an unusual way. After all, Dali was a surrealist painter who rejected a rational vision of life in favor of the value of dreams and the unconscious. The Christ of John of the Cross is an arresting painting. On the one hand, I can see Christ looking at the world with a reference to the Trinity, perhaps, expressed through the triangle of Christ's arms, with Christ's head representing the circle of unity. But also Christ dominates the whole picture, not only the visible world that we see at the bottom, but also the dark part, the invisible world, the whole universe. Dali may have wanted to portray Christ as the very unity of the universe. For want of a better word, that reconciles me with this painting.
I feel much the same as you, Viviane. The painting fascinates me, but part of its fascination is the very fact that it intrigues me, despite there being much about it that doesn't sit well with me. As you observe, it's too clean. Crucifixion is ugly, brutal, bloody. Dali doesn't include the crown of thorns, nor the nails through Jesus' hands and feet. There's no blood. Also, and I think you agree, Jesus' skin tone is all wrong, far too pale in my opinion. I have made my own version of the painting, as we see up there, and to agree, have duplicated the same omissions that I criticise in the original. I have tried to draw the nails in his hands, but have shied away from attempting to add the crown of thorns. Rather, I have drawn in streaks of blood through Christ's hair. I've also failed to get the skin tone right, as far as right is in my eyes. My excuse is my limited artistic skills. I don't know what Dali's thinking was regarding his colour palette, but as you explained, Vivian, he did claim that his painting is devoid of nails, blood, and a crown of thorns, because he was convinced by a dream that these features would mar his depiction of Christ. Apparently, it was also in a dream that the importance of depicting Christ in the extreme angle evident in the painting was revealed to him. Yet, I think it's because of this very feature, its aspect, that it still captures my imagination. Whereas its darkness seems to trouble you, Vivian, I like the imagery that it conjures up. For me, it depicts God in his glory, high above the ground, in outer space almost. Even in the agony of his sacrifice, he is Lord and is watching over us. And this is what I take from the painting. The worst of it is a monologue by Mary, the mother of Jesus. The worst of it was not when he finally died. After what they did to him, to see there was no more heaving of his chest, no more breath being gasped for, was a relief. His pain was over. They could not lay a hand on him anymore. I longed to reach for him, to cut him down, to cradle him. That was not the worst of it. Seeing him exposed and broken, and being unable to hold him one last time, even in death. No mother should have to see her child tortured, mocked, insulted like he was. The way they treated him like the lowest of criminals. Oh, my boy. But not once did he spit back or protest. Not even as he took the whip and his skin broke and bled. Even that was not the worst of it. And the cruelty of crowning him with thorns, dressing him up like a king, parading him out in the streets, bowing and scraping around him, jeering and howling like crazed animals, enjoying their contempt for him. And I could not stop them. I could not stop any of it, and I could not rescue my son. I could not even grasp his hand, speak a word of love in the chaos. I tried to keep as close as I could in all the pushing and shoving of men and soldiers, but I was powerless to ease his torment.
even that was not the worst of it. I could not look as they took the nails and ropes and forced him down, then hoisted him up. I knew what to expect. We had seen it all before. The wretchedness of hanging there for days, waiting for the mercy of death. How long would it be for him? How long till he breathed his last? I feared it would be slow and long. But that was not the worst of it. No, the worst of it was his shout, his wail of abandonment. I do not know how he had the breath left for such a harrowing cry. He cried against heaven, against the Almighty, a final desolate groaning at being forsaken in the end, forsaken by his Father. At the end of your faithful, passionate, joyful life, my son, in the end, they defeated you. Oh, my child, you were never cut off, forgotten, left by our God. You were never abandoned, even at the last. But you cried out the misery of being deserted, the pain overwhelming you in the end, and who can blame you? But after all your years of hope and faith, all you taught us, all your life and laughter, I cannot bear that at the end you felt cast aside by your Father, our Father. My God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus, my boy, if only I could tell you it was never like that. You were anything but forsaken. You were loved to the end, loved beyond death. Oh God, why did they break you so completely? Why?